3:58:07. SPY-6, radar aboard USS Spruance detects 24 inbound contacts from 3 Iranian coastal sectors, and every defensive system in the Abraham Lincoln Strike Group turns toward a picture it believes it understands. 8 ballistic tracks are climbing high and fast from the north-northeast. 4 sea-skimming cruise missiles are cutting south of the carrier screen at 870 kilometers per hour. 12 drones are descending in staggered waves toward the formation center. The Aegis combat system begins sorting the raid exactly the way doctrine requires against a multi-axis retaliatory strike on a U.S. carrier at the exact moment the U.S. Navy is most committed forward. The problem is that the system was designed to protect the most obvious target in the formation. It was not designed to understand, in the first 12 seconds of a 2-4 contact raid, that the most obvious target is not the one Iran actually wants. The Abraham Lincoln Strike Group has 6 minutes and 41 seconds before the first warhead reaches lethal range, and Lieutenant Commander Elena Rios already knows the ship under real attack is not the carrier. Rios is not an air defense officer. She is not standing over the Aegis console, and she is not the one calling interceptor assignments into the Combat Information Center. She is the embarked logistics operations analyst, a job that sounds administrative until a war reaches the point where fuel, ordnance, and deck cycles matter more than rhetoric, speed, or slogans. While Tactical Action Officer Lieutenant Commander Caleb Mercer is assigning SM-6 interceptors to the ballistic tracks and building an engagement picture around Abraham Lincoln's hull, Rios is looking 21 nautical miles south of the carrier at the one ship that makes the next 36 hours of strike operations possible. USNS Supply is running in replenishment support position with 4.7 million gallons of JP-5 aboard, 1,800 tons of aviation ordnance in protected magazines, and the fuel and bomb stocks for the next 142 carrier sorties. The carrier itself does not need JP-5, the aircraft do. And if Iran cannot kill Abraham Lincoln tonight, disabling supply would cut the carrier's strike rhythm in half by morning. That was the assessment Rios wrote 9 days ago, and it had come back logged, reviewed, and acknowledged without changing the formation's working assumptions. At 3:58:13, she sees the new threat baskets begin to render on the common tactical display and understands that her assessment has just become the most important document in the theater. To understand what is happening, you need to understand what the U.S. Navy had just done to Iran 36 minutes earlier. At 3:22, 146 Tomahawk cruise missiles left vertical launch cells across 9 U.S. Navy warships spread from the Arabian Sea to the eastern Mediterranean. 48F, A-18E, and F, A-18F. Super Hornets had launched in 4 strike packages carrying 96 GBU, 3 1JDAMs and 24 AGM, 154 glide weapons against hardened radar nodes, missile depots, command bunkers, naval piers, communications stations, and surviving launch shelters tracked over 34 days of war. It was not a retaliatory raid, it was a system kill. One offensive plan intended to collapse every remaining Iranian military function that could still coordinate missile launches against U.S. forces at sea. The opening wave hit coastal radar sites at 3:46. The first naval base took simultaneous Tomahawk impacts at 3:47. 2 hardened command sites went dark at 3:49. By 3:54, the Iranian command structure had lost enough fixed capacity that only mobile assets and pre-planned fallback cells remained. That was the moment Rios had been thinking about for more than a week, because when Iran realized it could no longer protect everything, it was never going to spend its last coordinated salvo on the largest target alone. It was going to spend it on the target that kept the largest target useful. Her paper had been brutally simple. When a carrier strike group is generating high sortie tempo, the carrier is not the only capital asset in the formation. The logistics ship is the hidden center of gravity. Kill a destroyer and the formation tightens. Damage a radar array and the formation adapts. Force the carrier to conserve fuel and ordnance because the replenishment ship is burning, and the entire operational tempo changes without touching the flight deck. Rios had requested three things 9 days earlier. Move supply 14 nautical miles farther south during major strike windows. Pre-authorized Southern Sector Nulka decoy launches for the logistics ship without waiting for carrier-level confirmation. And station one destroyer in a geometry built not around protecting Abraham Lincoln's bow, but around intercepting sea-skimming threats approaching the replenishment lane. Rear Admiral Carver approved only one of the three, the Nulka Release Authority. The rest were set aside because a strike group at war cannot put every supporting ship on maximum standoff without stretching the screen. At 3:58 and 21 seconds, Rios watches the geometry she lost on paper become a real problem in the air. What the system believed was happening was a retaliatory strike on Abraham Lincoln, timed to coincide with the biggest U.S. naval offensive of the war. What was actually happening was a distraction architecture built to keep every eye in the formation on the carrier while the lethal basket converged on supply. The 8 ballistic tracks are loud, bright, and obvious, but their projected impact lanes are long. The 12 drones are descending toward the carrier, but they are still 5 minutes from effective attack range. The 4 cruise missiles, low and fast and already inside the southern picture, are the things that matter now, and their geometry tells the story before anyone else in CIC wants to believe it. They are not lined up on Abraham Lincoln's hull. They are lined up on the Oilers' replenishment track. At 3:58 and 28 seconds, Rios gets on the circuit. Sir, this is Rios in logistics assessment. The primary target is supply, not Lincoln. The cruise basket is centered 19 nautical miles south on the replenishment lane. If supply burns, we lose tomorrow's strike cycle. Mercer answers the way a tactical action officer has to answer, with 24 contacts inbound and only partial certainty in the first 20 seconds. Assessment logged. Stand by. He is not dismissing her. He is doing what doctrine and the display demand. But the display is carrier-centered, and carrier-centered thinking is the thing Iran spent 34 days learning to exploit. At 3:58 and 41 seconds, the first 2 SM-6 interceptors leave USS Frank E. Peterson against the lead ballistic track. 4 seconds later, USS Spruance launches 2 more against the second pair. Abraham Lincoln begins a defensive turn 11 degrees to port to improve intercept geometry against the northern sector. A correct maneuver if the threat is what the picture says it is. Supply, 21 nautical miles south, is still on its previous course, making 18 knots, with its deck lighting darkened, but its fuel transfer pumping systems warm, its exhaust pattern steady, and its thermal and radar profile larger than any auxiliary wants to be in a missile fight. Rios does not stay silent. She has already run the numbers because she ran them before the strike ever started. 4 sea-skimming missiles at this approach angle, if not disrupted, reach supply in 4 minutes and 08 seconds. 1 warhead into the JP-5 section does not just damage the oiler. It turns the ship that fuels the air wing into the brightest fire on the water. At 3:59 and 02 seconds, she sends the full recommendation. Immediate southern break for supply. 0 emitters. Full pump shutdown. Deploy Nulka off south beam. Shift Hudner to bearing 177 now. Ballistics are screen fixing. Cruise is the kill mechanism. Mercer looks at the updated baskets. She is right. Not abstractly. Geometrically. The ballistic missiles are forcing the destroyers to look north, while the real threat is sliding under the formation's attention toward the support ship. Rear Admiral Carver takes the circuit himself at 3:59 and 11 seconds. Rios, are you calling the strike on supply? Her answer is one sentence. Yes, sir. A carrier may not need fuel. Its aircraft do. That sentence changes the battle. At 3:59 and 18 seconds, Carver orders USNS Supply to emergency dark ship condition and hard turn 24 degrees starboard away from the replenishment lane. USS Thomas Hudner breaks south at flank speed to rebuild the geometry Rios had requested 9 days earlier. Abraham Lincoln holds her own turn because the ballistic picture still has to be fought, but the mental center of the engagement has shifted. At 3:59 and 33 seconds, Supply shuts down its active emitters, kills every non-essential transmission, and closes pump systems that had been warming the outer hull with a detectable thermal trace. The ship loses maneuvering efficiency for 14 seconds during the shutdown sequence. That matters, because 14 seconds is almost exactly how much time Iran expected the Americans to waste deciding what the real target was. At 4:04 seconds, the first ballistic intercepts detonate cleanly north of the formation. 2 kills, 4 inbound remain on the high track. The drone wave is still outside lethal range, and the cruise missiles are now 59 nautical miles from Supply. Hudner's radar acquires them with better quality than Abraham Lincoln ever had, because the destroyer is finally where it should have been when the attack began. That difference in geometry is the difference between a shot and a guess. At 4:11 seconds, Hudner fires 2 SM-2 interceptors at the leading pair. At 4:16 seconds, Supply launches the first pre-authorized Nulka decoy 390 meters off its port quarter. 8 seconds later, a second decoy goes off the starboard beam. Rios does not want the oiler to look invisible. She wants it to look uncertain. A missile can kill a ship. It cannot kill 3 contradictory versions of the ship with the same confidence. Iran had built the strike smartly. The cruise missiles were not coming in as one neat line. They were offset in 2 pairs 13 seconds apart, with the trailing pair slightly lower and farther south, so that any defensive fire committed to the first 2 would reveal the oiler's evasive geometry to the last 2. It was a logistics kill chain disguised as a carrier raid. Iran did not design the attack to defeat the carrier's defenses. Iran designed it to make those defenses protect the wrong ship first and the right ship too late. At 4:38 seconds, the first SM-2 misses wide of the lead cruise missile because the missile drops to 7 meters and disappears into sea clutter for 1.2 seconds before reappearing. The second interceptor detonates 19 meters off the target and tears away part of the missile's stabilizer. The damaged contact continues, but is now off its clean line. 32 seconds later, Hudner's second firing pair goes out against the trailing missiles. On the carrier, Rios is no longer watching the north. She is watching Supply's thermal profile and the 2 decoys spreading separation to either side of the oiler's altered course. If the missiles choose wrong now, the whole Iranian design collapses. If they stay on the true hull, they still have enough time to kill the ship. At 4:03 seconds, the first damaged cruise missile does exactly what Rios was trying to force. It shifts 8 degrees toward the hotter of the 2 false signatures off Supply's port quarter. That move matters because it reveals the seeker logic. The missiles were not purely radar homers. They were blending radar and thermal discrimination in terminal phase to find the most useful large target in the replenishment lane. Blank the oiler, distort its heat, and give them hotter or brighter lies, and they can be pulled. They're buying the decoys, Rios says, almost to herself. Mercer hears it and immediately knows what the rest of the defense needs to do. Do not shoot at what the decoy is already killing. Shoot at what still remembers the real ship. At 4:18 seconds, the remaining ballistic tracks begin their terminal descent on Abraham Lincoln. Spruance and Peterson handle them cleanly. 3 are destroyed by SM-6. The 4th breaks up under phalanx fire, 1.9 nautical miles from the carrier. The drone wave starts to unravel under jamming and gunfire. The carrier survives the visible attack exactly as Iran expected it to. The problem for Iran is that the invisible purpose of the attack is now falling apart too. The first cruise missile detonates on the port decoy at 4:26 seconds, 510 meters from Supply's actual hull. The second, the damaged one, slams into the water 230 meters beyond it after failing to correct. The third missile stays locked on the real oiler. That is the dangerous one. It ignored the thermal lie and held to the altered course, which means its seeker had a stronger initial fix than the others. Hudner fires its last clean SM-2 shot at 4:31 seconds and misses by 24 meters. Supply now has 47 seconds before impact and 1 missile still coming. This is where Rios stops being the analyst who predicted the attack and becomes the person who keeps the ship alive. 9 days earlier, after her written assessment was filed, she built a follow-on drill nobody ever ran because nobody wanted to rehearse losing a replenishment ship under missile threat in the middle of carrier ops. The drill was called Cold Wake. Its logic was brutally simple. A ship underway always leaves a thermal and radar logic behind it in the disturbed water, exhaust wash, and engine wake. If a terminal seeker is solving for the center of that logic instead of the steel itself, then a violent enough speed and rudder change can shift the ship out of its own wake solution faster than a sea-skimming missile can fully correct in the last few seconds. She had never been given approval to test it. She uses it anyway. At 4, 1, and 39 seconds, she cuts through every remaining hesitation on the circuit. Supply all ahead flank. Hard left rudder 31 degrees now. Cold wake now. The master of the oiler does not ask for doctrinal validation. He executes. 90,000 tons of fuel and ordnance support ship lurch into the ugliest emergency turn of the war. Screws digging hard, stern wash expanding, thermal wake widening, and bending off the previous track line. The missile is now 0.9 nautical miles out. Its seeker still believes the largest coherent target is where supply was 6 seconds ago. At 4, 1, and 46 seconds, Hudner launches its second Nulka farther aft than doctrine would normally allow, directly into the oiler's old wake geometry. The missile chooses between two things at once: the false point blooming in the old line, and the real ship no longer centered in the wake it had been reading for the last 40 seconds. It chooses wrong. At 4, 1, and 52 seconds, the third cruise missile passes 74 meters off, Supply's starboard quarter, overcorrects toward the second decoy, and detonates in the water 0.3 nautical miles aft of the ship. The blast throws fuel spray, fragments, and a shock wave across the stern, injuring 11 sailors and damaging 1 replenishment gantry. But the tanks hold, and the main fuel section does not ignite.